All right, so what we've done here is we've taken an entire university lecture on romantic poetry and we've basically distilled it down to its most powerful, essential insights. We're going to turn all that complex academic stuff into something clear, accessible, and, you'll see, surprisingly relevant.
So let's kick things off with a big question, right? What's really the difference between just having an opinion and making a solid, real argument? Well, the answer, believe it or not, is hiding in some detailed feedback a professor gave to their students. And that's exactly where our journey is going to begin.
Okay, first up, we're getting practical. We're going to look at what I'm calling the professor's playbook. This is all about how to build a stronger argument, and we're pulling these lessons directly from comments made on 2 student essays. Think of it as an inside peek at what really makes an analysis work. And this right here, this gets right to the heart of it. The professor pointed out that one student, Shaden, just made a broad statement: the character was disagreeable. Okay, but that's just a feeling, you know? A real argument gives you the why. It provides the evidence, pointing to a specific line, a specific action, and saying the character is disagreeable because of this. It's that classic show, don't tell rule. And this wasn't just a one-off thing. When you look at the notes for both Shaden and another student, A, you see the same pattern pop up. The professor kept pushing them to go deeper, to use more specific examples, and, this is a big one, to stop just summarizing the plot. For instance, student A was asked about the meaning of a handkerchief in a play, and instead of analyzing its symbolism, they just retold the story of the handkerchief. That's a summary, not an analysis. So here's the key takeaway from the professor's playbook. Your initial personal reaction, that's a totally fine starting point. We all have them. But to build a real argument, that feeling is just the beginning. It absolutely has to be followed up with some rigorous, evidence-based analysis. That's the real meat of the argument. Okay, so with that foundation in critical thinking locked in, we can finally turn to the main event of the lecture, the Romantic poets. So, what was this revolutionary movement in art and feeling all about? Let's decode it. Well, in the class discussion, the students nailed the core ideas pretty quickly. First, a deep, almost spiritual connection to nature. Second, a major focus on expressing inner feelings. Your personal, individual experience suddenly became the most important thing. And of course, like any new movement, it was a huge reaction against the super-ordered, rational thinking of the era that came before it. Now, the professor made a fantastic distinction here. A student pointed out that the Romantics' poetry seemed simple. The professor agreed, but clarified. It was simple, not simplistic, and that's a huge difference. Poets like Wordsworth were doing this on purpose. They used direct, everyday language to get at really profound ideas, stripping away all the obscure classical references that nobody understood anyway. It wasn't dumbed down, it was just direct. You have to remember, this movement was born out of a time of massive change and, well, disillusionment. With things like the Napoleonic Wars and the Industrial Revolution kicking off, people were craving something authentic. So instead of the perfectly manicured artificial gardens of the 18th century, the Romantics went searching for the raw, untamed, powerful side of the natural world. And that leads us perfectly to the quintessential Romantic poet, William Wordsworth. I mean, to really understand this movement, you have to get a handle on his unique creative process, which was all about turning everyday experiences into these huge, transcendent emotions. Our story actually starts not with the poet, but with his sister, Dorothy. Her journal entry about seeing daffodils is very factual, very observational. She describes a long belt of daffodils by a lake. It's lovely, don't get me wrong, but it's basically a report of what happened that day. Now look at how William transforms that exact same shared experience into "I wandered lonely as a cloud." See the shift? Dorothy's account was about us, his is about I. Hers was factual, his is purely emotional. The daffodils are no longer just flowers, they're the source of deep personal joy that he can tap into anytime just by remembering. The lecture breaks down Wordsworth's process into these 3 key steps. First, you have an intense, direct experience in nature, but, and this is the key, the poem isn't written right then. Step 2 happens later, in a moment of calm, where he remembers not just the event, but the feeling of the event. And it's from that memory that you get step 3, what he famously called the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. That's the poem. But this whole process of finding deep meaning in nature, it wasn't just a personal escape. For Wordsworth and the Romantics,
It actually became a powerful political tool, and it completely challenges that stereotype we have of the head in the clouds poet. So here's the common myth, right? Because they wrote so much about being alone in nature, we assume they were totally detached from the real world, just ignoring all the social and political problems of their day.
But the reality? It couldn't be more different. With this single line, "Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers," Wordsworth drops a blistering critique of consumerism. Seriously, you could argue the Romantics basically invented the modern protest poem, using the purity of nature as a weapon against the smoke and greed of the new industrial world. And what's wild is that this 200-year-old poem immediately resonated with the students in the lecture. They saw direct parallels to our own lives, talking about how we're all so preoccupied with material things. One student even brought up that saying, "You cannot eat money." The poem's message is just as powerful today as it was back then. So let's bring it all together. Why does the poetry movement from 2 centuries ago still have so much to say to us? What is the core message here that can cut through all the noise of our modern lives? I'll leave you with the very same question Wordsworth's poetry raises. In our own world, a world defined more than ever by getting and spending, have we forgotten our connection to something deeper? Are we, too, right now, still laying waste our powers?